Hi again. So today I'm going to tackle a pretty big issue, and one that I didn't even know existed before I adopted, and I really wish I did. And that is post-adoption depression syndrome, or PADS. I had no idea that such a thing existed. I had heard of postpartum depression, and I knew that there's a hormone imbalance after pregnancy that sometimes causes women to become depressed, and especially women who have been depressed in the past. But I had no idea that something similar could happen in adoptive parents. And so I wish I knew this before, because it's something that happened to me, and it was very severe in my case. And so before I go into my story, let's just cover some facts. So 18 to 26% of adoptive mothers, specifically, it affects mothers more than fathers, just like postpartum depression. 18 to 26% of adoptive mothers experience mild to severe post-adoptive depression syndrome. Now that's a lot. That's 1 in 4 approximately parents, adoptive parents. Think about that. 1 in 4, and we don't even talk about it. It's not really brought up at any of our meetings beforehand or with any social workers, probation officers. They don't really talk about it or even just sort of warn you to expect it. And I think it's just because no one talks about it. So I don't even think social workers and probation officers, and I don't think anyone really knows about it. So let's talk about what causes it. The leading researcher is Foli, and so I'll actually tag maybe her book that she's written about it in the comment section. But so she is sort of the lead researcher. She's done a study on about 200 families, I believe. It's about 200. And so she sort of looked into what are the most relevant predictors of PADS. And so what she found is fatigue is number 1. So I think just like in all new parents, fatigue is huge. When you bring home an adoptive child, sometimes the sleep deprivation can be just as bad as with a newborn baby, even if your baby's not newborn, because your child may not adjust very well, they might not be sleeping well, they might be having night terrors, nightmares, or there's just often just like almost an insomnia that comes because you're worried all the time, and you're going through everything in your head as to what you still have to do for the process, and is the child developing properly, are they adjusting, all these things. So fatigue was the number 1 predictor of PADS. So before the child comes home, I think a lot of us have this sort of fantasy that the children are going to come home, it's just going to be like an instant connection, it's going to be like rainbows and butterflies all the time, and immediately, and very rarely does it actually happen. And so having unrealistic expectations of what the children are going to be like, what your family life is going to be like, how your spouse is going to handle things, even unrealistic expectations as to how your family, your extended family, is going to react to you adopting, sometimes can fall short. When people become biological parents, there's sort of this like 9-month lead up where everyone's excited, building up to it. And then when the baby comes, the friends sort of gather around, they'll bring meals for the new parents, they'll offer to come clean the house, they'll do all these things to really support them and lift them up, which is awesome. But often with adoptive parents, the same thing doesn't happen. So there's very often a very long lead up in the sense that you are going through the adoption process for sometimes years. But by the time you actually know you're going to adopt, that you're actually going to have a child, sometimes it can happen very quickly. Like you can be notified, you're matched, you're going next month, and it happens like a whirlwind. And so because adoption isn't a guarantee, so the whole time you're going through the process, I believe that a lot of families, at least from my personal experience, they're almost afraid to invest too much because they're afraid to sort of build it up, and if it fails, you're gonna feel like you're disappointing them as well. So they sort of hold back until the child comes home. But sometimes that window is so small between when you find out the child's coming home and the child coming home, the family and the friends don't really provide that same social network, that same support that you would get in the 9 months leading up to a biological child. Self-esteem was another predictor. So having low self-esteem, feeling like you can't do it, feeling like on those days where your child is having their trauma tantrums and you don't understand what's going on, you don't know how to work through it, you just sort of feel like a failure. Satisfaction within your marriage in the sense that like if you've gone through years and years and years of trying with your partner to be parents and it finally happens and it's just not exactly what you expected, or the parenting styles are different, or because when your child comes home in adoptive situations, often they're already at an age where they need to have discipline and boundaries. And so it's not like a newborn where it's your first child together, you have the child as newborn. Newborns don't need discipline. They just need to be fed and taken care of. And it's completely exhausting on a couple. But those major parenting pivotal moments don't come until later. And you sort of have time to build them together. You grow together in how you're going to parent and how you're going to work through these things. And as the child grows, you sort of learn together what works, what doesn't, and as parents, you do that together. But when you have an adoptive child and they come in, and so say they come in at 2, 3, 4 or older, where as they're coming in, they need those boundaries, and they need it now, that you don't have time as a couple to really sort that out. So what happened with us, and I think with a lot of adoptive parents, is that one will parent one way and one will parent another way instinctively, because you've never done it. You don't know what you're doing. You're just sort of going on instinct. And often they're different, and that can affect a marriage and can affect just the way you communicate with each other too, and can create some hostility. When a child comes home during an adoption process, for people who are infertile, and that's the reason they're adopting, once that child comes home, it can open up a whole can of worms as to why that child came home. And I'm not saying that you wouldn't have adopted anyway, but what I'm saying is that sometimes it's a reminder of the fact that you couldn't have your own biological child, and you love your adoptive children fiercely, but as a woman, sometimes, for some women, it can rehash those feelings of being inadequate or feeling like you're not capable of doing what other women are doing. It doesn't make you love the child any less. It doesn't make you feel any differently towards your adoptive child. It just makes you harder on yourself, which is what depression really is, and it's sort of internalizing all those feelings towards yourself. Some women also experience guilt over taking care of another woman's birth child, and so because they've struggled so much to have their own biological child, in some cases people don't want biological children. But for those that have in the past and have tried, they know how precious a child's life is. And so having another woman's child can sometimes be overwhelming, and people can feel guilt associated with that this is someone else's child, they gave birth to it, and now I'm the one that gets to experience the love and the affection from this child. And another huge indicator is financial stress. So kids cost money. Like, let's just get that out there. Kids are expensive right from the get-go. Like diapers, formula, even if you have a baby, and then if you don't, it's all the activities and the clothes and the eating properly and vitamins and everything, right? Medicine, all that stuff. So kids are expensive, point blank. Now, when you have an adoptive child, you have just spent thousands of dollars to bring your child home. Sometimes people have family and friends donate towards it, so the financial stress isn't as much on them personally. Other times, people do it all on their own. And so it's either through loans or through saving or through a combination of both or all three. But when a kid comes home, there is a ton of financial stress that's sort of built up to that point. And so, I think everyone knows that one of the biggest stresses in a marriage is financial problems. And so, and it can cause depression in people who don't have children. So now you have a new child with sometimes very unique traumas, very unique issues you have to work through. You're going through all these things, and now you also have huge financial burden on your shoulders as well. So, it's not a wonder that people face depression when this happens, and that they go through some of those major emotions and not knowing how to process them, and dealing with anxiety and depression, especially after the child comes home. And usually, statistically, it's within the first month that women will start to experience the symptoms of post-adoptive depression syndrome. So now, what are the symptoms? So what do we look for? What happens? What happens when you have it? How do you know you have it? So you get anxious about things that you would normally not get anxious about, even potentially have panic attacks, not being able to breathe, shortness of breath, and just for something that seems really minor but suddenly becomes a huge issue. feeling like you're worthless, feeling like you can't take care of these children, that you're not worthy of taking care of these children, that you're failing them, and you're failing your husband or your wife. Overwhelming feeling of loneliness is another huge symptom, where even though you're surrounded by your children and potentially your partner and friends and family, you just feel incredibly lonely. Having low self-esteem, having thoughts of guilt, like you're just not doing it properly. Everything you're doing is wrong. You're not disciplining properly. You're not loving properly. You're not taking care of everyone properly. Those overwhelming feelings of guilt. Losing interest in hobbies and activities that you would normally love. Loss of appetite or loss or gain of weight. Not sleeping properly. So either sleeping too much or sleeping not at all. So either insomnia or oversleeping. Being really irritable or angry at times where you just normally wouldn't be, and just overwhelmingly so that you can't almost even control the emotions. And then once you get into the severe depression, that's when you start having overwhelming negative thoughts that make you feel worthless and that the world is better without you. And suicidal tendencies, forgetfulness, you can't concentrate on things, just your whole world just sort of falls apart around you, and you don't really know how to pick up the pieces. What can we do? What do we do to prepare ourselves for it, and what do we do once this happens? Well, the biggest thing we can do to prepare ourselves is just to set realistic goals, to know that depression can happen, to know that these things happen to a lot of people, to give yourself some grace in those moments, but also to have realistic expectations for your family, for your marriage. Talk about it with your partner, and if you're doing it alone, have a support network before you come home, knowing it's going to be challenging, knowing people are going to be there when you need them. So that when you do have these moments, you have people you can call. You have people to back you up. The other thing is that if you do find yourself in the thick of it and you feel like that you know you're depressed, you know that these symptoms are describing you don't be afraid to get help. I know that through the adoption process, we're basically told, mental illness is taboo. You can lose your kids. You may not even get kids placed with you if you suffer with depression and anxiety. But the truth is, this is science, this is medicine, it happens. You can't prevent it from happening. You can try to curb it, you can try to alleviate it so it's not as bad, but go to a doctor, get help if you need it. Surround yourself with your friends and family who are going to support you. And just don't be embarrassed to talk about it. Don't be embarrassed to tell your partner that this is what's going on, or your friends and family, and just ask for that support. Anyway, this was a little bit of a heavier talk today, but because it was something so personal to me, I'm hoping that there's someone out there that can watch this before their kid comes home, or just as their kids come home, and they're thinking, man, am I the only one that's gone through this? And knowing, no, you're not. It's normal. P.A.D.S affects a lot of us. 1 in 4 adoptive parents, adoptive mothers specifically, go through this. So know you're not alone. Seek out the help you need, the support you need, and stand up for yourself, and love yourself, and give yourself the care you need whenever you can. And until next time, thanks so much.